price of the Bitcoin much. And then say if it is going down, then we can take the opportunity to move faster probably and acquire faster.
Hello everyone, this is BTC Insight and welcome to yet another deep dive into BTC Insight. Before we jump in, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't yet. You won't want to miss this. Revolutionary steps MicroStrategy took was becoming the first public company to adopt Bitcoin as its primary treasury reserve asset. 5 years ago, this was uncharted territory. At that time, there was no roadmap, no market precedent, and very little institutional infrastructure to support such a move. Yet, MicroStrategy leaned into innovation. What began as a bold decision soon became a movement. Fast forward to today, more than 150 public companies worldwide now hold Bitcoin on their balance sheets. This represents a huge shift in how corporate treasuries operate. But it wasn't just about buying Bitcoin. Shirish explains that companies had to figure out how to communicate this to investors. At first, the key metric was simply Bitcoin holdings, but investors demanded more clarity. They wanted to know Bitcoin per share, Bitcoin yield, and how treasury strategies compared across companies.
Investor relations is such an important function for the companies to be able to talk to their investors and to relay information and tell the story about the company to the end user. And the customer of your stock is basically your investors.
Yeah.
And a lot of these companies are in the traditional method of doing like quarterly talking to the investors, which has worked for the companies because there's not much happening in between the quarters to be able to relay more frequently. But with respect to us, we are doing things so frequently, like we are doing things like almost every 2 weeks, every week.
Yeah.
So there's so much to update the investors about that we have to kind of keep up with that and to innovate here. We launched our website strategy.com with so many different metrics to give more real-time information to the investors so that they can see what we see. And then also, how can we communicate? There was an innovation at every step. There was always a struggle with the bankers and lawyers on how you do things differently. And now they understand, like, we always want to do things like differently, and people have gotten around it. But things like publishing a presentation on X, publishing a video on YouTube in real time, and how do you do that? Getting some investor feedback surveys and giving access to new investors to be able to reach out to the company and meet new social mediums, or like how do you reach out to people through different ways and how do you communicate to them, not just the traditional way. So that was all the innovation that we embraced, and that is being very well received by the community. These are all the new metrics we thought about as we were thinking about how do we communicate our story to the world. And when we started, we were the first Bitcoin treasury company, and there were not that many companies out there. I remember like 5 years ago, Strategy was the only one. 3 months ago, I remember the stat was around 70 public companies in the world had adopted Bitcoin. And now that number stands at around like over 150 companies, public companies holding Bitcoin treasury. That's like a huge, huge step forward. And when we were doing it, we had to think like, how do we tell the story differently? And what are the investors looking for? Bitcoin count was the only thing we started with. And then like we started to accumulate Bitcoin, but what are investors looking for? They are looking for increasing on the Bitcoin count or Bitcoin content per share. And that's started the Bitcoin yield variation of that. And then we started communicating Bitcoin yield. And then it came about like all the entire theory of now Bitcoin corporate finance. And we had like the convertible debt, we have the equity, we have the preferred equities. So when we have so many instruments, how do we enable people to compare different instruments on what should they invest in, or how do they evaluate the risk return profile of different instruments? And that's how we came up with this theory of different metrics. And we saw a great adoption from all the different companies, and they're adopting those terminologies. And that's a great endorsement to the entire like Bitcoin treasury ecosystem, where different companies across the world in different countries are adopting similar-ish metrics. And that goes a long way about investors' acceptance also of these metrics to be able to judge the performance of different companies. I think investors do care about the holistic value of the company. So they do look at the Bitcoin business as the primary business. The way I would frame that is they look at it in the proportion of the valuation mix for the different companies. So as the Bitcoin proportion of a company's business keeps on going up, investors' focus shifts more towards the Bitcoin side of things. And that's pretty natural. But they do look at like how the rest of the operating business is also doing. And they just want to make sure it's working fine and there are optimizations happening there. Or what are the growth metrics or something? So they do look at that because that gives them the comfort and sort of the downside protection in a way when evaluating these companies with respect to Bitcoin. But the Bitcoin content has certainly like gone up a lot. So the focus is a lot on the Bitcoin side now.
Looking ahead, Shirish predicts that we'll see a wide spectrum of Bitcoin treasury companies emerge. Some will be conservative, institutional-grade adopters like MicroStrategy. Others will take more aggressive, high-risk approaches. This diversity is healthy. It gives investors choices across the risk spectrum, allowing them to decide whether they want a safe, long-term play or a more speculative bet. What's certain is that the Bitcoin treasury model is here to stay, and it will likely expand dramatically as more companies recognize the value of digital assets in an inflationary world.
The way to think about it is like we are buying the Bitcoin around the clock. People ask this question to me and us and our Bitcoin team that, oh, did Strategy buy Bitcoin? Or there's speculation I see on X when like, oh, they must have bought the Bitcoin, that's why it's spiking. But what I say is we are actually buying Bitcoin around the clock. Almost every day, every hour, every second, we are in the market. And the way we buy Bitcoin is we do not move the price of the Bitcoin. So we kind of manage our buys in a way that we are kind of some proportion of the market liquidity. So we do not kind of eat up into the price of the Bitcoin. So if it's appreciating very fast, that very likely may not be us because we don't like to kind of move the price of the Bitcoin much. And then say if it is going down, then we can take the opportunity to move faster probably and acquire faster. So we change the pacings of how we acquire, but we are in the market most of the time, depending on how much we are buying with. It moves over time, and the way I would also say is it kind of provides a higher and higher floor over time as there's more institutional buying happening. These institutions are holding for a long term, and we are holding for the long term. So the floor price of Bitcoin keeps going up over time. However, like in the near term, there are other market factors that determine the price fluctuations. And that's like the trader community that kind of impacts the near term price movement and not like the long term kind of buyers. Because the trading volume, if you see, Bitcoin's trading volume is over $50 billion in any 24 hours. And that's like a huge volume. So if you are buying $1 billion over a couple of days, it's not that much actually to move the market. I think the most difficult aspect of this is to get the right understanding and the right conviction. That's perhaps the most difficult thing. And the first buys for people are difficult, and that first movement, first step forward, and probably the second step forward is equally difficult as well if the price has dropped from where you bought first. But once you have gotten through those first two steps and you have gotten into the process, then I think it starts to become more natural and easier once you understand with conviction. Thankfully, our playbook is out there now for other people to look at. And this ecosystem has developed significantly from when we started 5 years ago, when there was not that much market resources available. So it has gotten certainly easier for others to follow our paths. And just to give you some context, when we started, it was hard to find one single bank to underwrite any financing for us. One single bank. And none of the big bulge bracket banks wanted to touch Bitcoin. And now we have relationships with over 25 banks and with who's who, like all the banks in the world. And everybody wants to do business with us. We are one of the highest fee payers last year for the last 12 months, 18 months.
Wow.
And we have raised so much capital. And we see all the banks warming up to digital assets. They are getting more friendlier. It's still evolving and there's more room to go, but it's improving. On the research analyst side, there were like 2 analysts covering MicroStrategy or strategy. And Now there are over 12 analysts covering strategy, and there's a lot of interest. So that has evolved. And in terms of institutional research and publication, I mean, all these ETFs and Fidelity and other people are publishing so much content, and there's good content, and podcasters like you guys, I mean, you're doing a fantastic job of getting the message across from different participants in the ecosystem. And there's so much great content for everyone out there. So people can figure out what they want and understand. And for the executives who are looking to enter into this strategy, they have the resources available now. So it's kind of more readily available. And I wouldn't say easy, but it's readily available for people. And they need to do the initial proof of work, put in the hours. And then once they get through that, then they just need to get in with it with the conviction.
Looking ahead, Shirish predicts that we'll see a wide spectrum of Bitcoin treasury companies emerge. Some will be conservative, institutional-grade adopters like MicroStrategy. Others will take more aggressive, high-risk approaches. This diversity is healthy. It gives investors choices across the risk spectrum, allowing them to decide whether they want a safe, long-term play or a more speculative bet. What's certain is that the Bitcoin treasury model is here to stay, and it will likely expand dramatically as more companies recognize the value of digital assets in an inflationary world. That's it for today's look into BTC Insight. If you enjoyed this deep dive, hit that like button, drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay on top of all the latest insights. Keep questioning, keep learning, and we'll catch you in the next one.